All right. Well, I was in school. I was my science club president. I was an evolutionist. I was taught and raised in public schools that about basically materialism. That this is all there is, and this is all there's going to be, and so make the most of it. And I really was into chemistry when I was in school, and I really thought I was going to do that for a living eventually. Some things happened in my life, and I ended up in the military. And during an exercise, I was in a vehicle that turned over and was turning over, but actually stopped turning over. And it was quite an event. And I thought I was dead for a few minutes. And then all of a sudden I realized I'm not dead. So something must be true here. The background of this, though, is there was a truck driver that continually reached out to me when I was in the Army and invited me to church. And I just didn't want to hear about it because I didn't want to be accountable to a God, right? And so I was living the high life as a young 20-year-old when this happened. And my mom had always offered up Christ to me and always offered up the Bible. And when I remember going into the military, my mom saying, well, son, I love you, but, if you don't know Jesus, you're going to go to hell. And that's basically how she witnessed to me. And, if you're like a teenager or whatever, you know how you're going to respond to that. Well, I'm out of here, right? So I used to read the Bible and argue with her about science in the Bible. From the scriptures, I would try and find arguments against how this could not be true in the Bible. And I would read the Bible and I would argue with her over it, all the way from probably age 15 till I was out of school and actually even when I was in the military. But this event happened and I realized there's something above nature. There's something supernatural. Because I should not have survived what happened. And the guy with me just broke down, cried, ran off. I mean, the two of us that were in this vehicle, we thought, this is it, we're done. But it didn't happen. So after that, I was convicted that there was something above the natural world. And I went and found that truck driver from Iowa. And I went to church with him. It was a few weeks after that event. It was in the spring, probably 1983, I believe. And I went to church with him, and I accepted Christ. So the biggest problem I had was, how do I jive this Christian faith with my evolutionary materialist background? And I didn't even want to think about ages of Earth or anything like that at that point in time. But it was a real challenge for me. So I had become a Christian, and I was in a demilitarized zone, and I was laying on some ammunition boxes. I was all on my own on a range in a demilitarized zone, and I was looking up, and I saw the first star was actually a planet, probably Saturn because it was fall. But anyway, that's another story. And I looked up, and I saw this planet, first star I see tonight kind of thing. And immediately came into my mind, you alone are the Lord. You created the heavens. The highest heavens and their starry hosts, the earth and all that's on it, the seas and all that's in them. And you gave life to everything. And the multitudes of heaven worship you. And there was no internet, okay, kids? No internet. All I had was a Bible that my mother had shipped back to me overseas. And it was a little red Methodist RSV Bible. The translation's terrible, by the way.
That's us Methodists.
But I knew that verse came from that Bible somewhere when I was reading it to argue with my mother. But I didn't know where it was. So guess what I had to do? I started reading to find it. So I started in Genesis and made my way all the way to Nehemiah, 9th chapter, 6th verse, and guess what? That's where it is, where Ezra's speaking to the people. And so that's a life verse. And I want you to think about somebody who was into materialism and was studying chemistry, and that was going to be my background, and that was what I was going to do with my life. And I could never justify how dead chemicals came to life. And here's this verse that says, he made all of this in the stars in the heavens. He made all the animals and all the plants and everything in the oceans, and he gave life to everything. If there's a biology person, I don't see Ryan's not here today. I don't see him anyway. We talked yesterday, but that was the biggest thing that caused me a problem. How did dead chemicals come to life? Well, one of the first laws of biology is the law of biogenesis, which means life comes from life. He's the life giver, and it's in that verse. And so it just was so deep and profound that I knew it was true. Then my Southern Baptist, Ricky, the truck driver, takes me to church, and he says, well, that's just John 14:26. Does anybody know what that verse is? The Holy Spirit that I'll send, the helper, he'll teach you everything, and he'll bring to remembrance things I said to you. And I was like, just blew me up, man. That's where it started. That was 36 years ago.
36 years ago.
I tell you, it was rough for a long time. I did not grow in my faith until I really started studying the Word and teaching it, and that's where he really changed me.
Right.
But yeah, I was a materialist, an evolutionist. I'm the guy that you kind of hate on or read posts about it on social media. I would have been that guy back then.
One more thing. See these two guys here, these young men right here? They're taking notes. We got 6 pages of notes from this morning here and last night right here.
Well, he was here
8 pages
yesterday.
between these guys.
He was here yesterday.
And they were here yesterday as students, so hey, way to go. Dan, you ready to take off here?
Yeah, I am. All those presentations that you missed and stuff, they're right there. We were talking about like the first and second laws. There's the videos for those two.
Okay, the flood, the second judgment.
All right. What do you guys know about the flood? Is it true? How do you know it's true? Because the Bible told me so. That's right. How about billions of dead things buried by billions of layers of rock? And yeah, that's another reason too, right? So let's just kind of take a really quick overview, a video overview of the flood. And if you're a young person here, I tried to hand out fossils to all the youngsters that are here. And if I missed some of you guys, back on the table there behind Dr. Rob, right behind him there is a bag, a baggie full of fossils. Make sure you kids get one. It's apologetics in your hand. But let's get a quick overview of the flood and kind of where we're at, right? And get a baseline to start
To
from.
some, the idea of Noah's flood conjures up images from Sunday school Bible stories of a small boat overstuffed with cute animals that gently bobbed in an ocean for 40 days. Many
There it
simply
is.
call it a myth. Fewer and fewer these days believe the flood account from Genesis 6 to 9 is actual history. The Bible frames the flood as an actual historical event, one that involved a specific family of 8.
Did I step?
Genesis says the flood lasted for a full year, engulfed the entire world, and preserved animals, plants, and humanity from well-deserved judgment. The flood represents the most detailed account of any single event in the Bible. Both the Apostle Peter and Jesus even referred to the Genesis flood as a real historical event. So it's safe to say that the credibility of the Bible, and even Jesus himself, hinges on whether the flood account actually happened as described in Genesis.
What were you guys taught in Sunday school? Did anybody know the cartoon, seen the cartoon ark with the little giraffes hanging out the windows and all of that stuff? So it's kind of hard when you're in Sunday school and they show you a cartoon of all this stuff to think that this is a real historical event, isn't it? We're not doing our kids any favors when we just kind of make it a children's story, right? We are if we teach it truthfully. And my hope is through this you will start realizing that, yes, this is a true historical event. It's not just the archaeology, the geology, or the engineering that goes into this. But these numbers and specs of the ark and whatnot are amazing when we study them, and we're going to do that today. Yes, 3 chapters of the Bible and about 88 verses cover this historical event. If it didn't happen, then our Bible, we might as well just forget about it. So if you are here and you don't believe in a global flood event, you're saying that the Bible's probably is incorrect. But I'm going to tell you scientifically why you have every reason to believe that it was a true historical event from every angle in science that we'll discuss. And I think you'll enjoy this. We will do a look at the pre-flood, what it was like in the days of Noah. What it was like in the days of Noah. Ariana asked this question last night. And so the coming at the end, when Jesus said it'll be as in the days of Noah, what is it that marked this world, which will be kind of fascinating for you knowing what's going on today. The sequence of the flood, the events that happened, and then we'll look at evidence and observations, more of a kind of a scientific method looking at how this is absolutely the truth, and it can be validated with science. So, we believe there was one continent simply because of Genesis 1:9. It's not plural, it's a single landmass. God said, let the waters under heaven be gathered into one place. Let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the waters were gathered together in what he would call the seas, and he saw that it was good, Genesis 1:9. Well, we know from our tectonic plates and a lot of wonderful science around plate tectonics today that these all fit together like a puzzle. And so it's quite fascinating to see where these all end up, and we'll see a little animation of that in just a second. So we believe what the Bible said is true. We believe they were high hills as opposed to mountains and valleys, which comes later in Psalm 104. So we didn't have Mount Everest. We didn't have 25,000-foot mountains. We had high hills. I don't know how high, but they would not be anything like we have today. Based on what we know, this says 30% more vegetation. That's not really true, because the truth of the matter is we only have 3% today of all foliage and vegetation that would have been in place. We only have 3% of what would have been in the pre-flood world. 97% more forest land than what you have today. If that's 97%, we only have 3% of the remaining. Does it make sense to you, what I'm saying? So just imagine how lush, green, and whatnot. So what do you think, what do plants take in? They take in carbon dioxide. And what do they put out, other than a little water vapor? Oxygen. So guess what the atmosphere had in it? 32% more oxygen. How do we know that there was 32% more oxygen for absolute sure thing? Well, amber, you guys ever seen amber or heard of it, right? It's this yellow stuff. It's basically pine tar that got fossilized when the tree got buried by floodwaters, right? Well, inside here, inside these little pieces of amber, there are bubbles. And on the back table back there, you can pick up and look at some of these. Some of them have insects in them and whatnot, which is fascinating. But these air bubbles within this, the U.S. Geological Survey did an analysis of that and found that the oxygen bubbles within this amber is 32% oxygen. I want you to look at this little graph up here. What they anticipate or say is that we ran at this high point of about 32% oxygen at some point in the past, and then the oxygen levels dropped all the way down and leveled out where they are today, about 20%. Gee, what happened right here in history? All the trees got buried, for one thing, so you lost, you have 3% of what existed, so a lot of oxygen got there. You also lost a lot of air pressure because the moisture that was in the air during the flood is now fallen. So we have an abundance of moisture in the air today, but we had a lot more moisture, we had a lot more pressure, and we had a lot more oxygen. And guess what happens when you take insects or fish or lizards? Why do I bring all those up? Because they grow till they die. You see a really big bug run around. He's an old bug, right? If you go fish and you catch a really large catfish, what does that tell you about that catfish? Well, he's been eating good, for one thing. The other it tells you is he's probably old, right, comparatively. Well, what if these fish don't have the gamma rays due to more protection in the atmosphere, have more oxygen available to them, and have more food available to them? You have dragonflies with 2.5-foot wingspans flying around. Now, I wouldn't enjoy that. Maybe the kids, the young guys are like, yeah, dude, that would be cool. I might have one as a pet. All right. But this explains, I mean, these are the facts that we're observing, right? So we have to say, whatever hypothesis we're going to come up with that answers these questions has to fit this. It just so happens that the pre-flood world and the fall, after the fall, answers these questions for us. Let's look at what it was like here at
According
the fall.
to Genesis, the Garden of Eden was a lush paradise, one that was set up for eternal life, worldwide vegetarianism, and harmony with our Creator. There was no bloodshed, disease, or even death. Plants and trees had no thorns or thistles, and humans tended God's creation. Then came the fall. We disobeyed God and ate the forbidden fruit. Sin entered the world, and death through sin. Suffering, pain, mutations, and cancer now plagued humanity. Plants and trees grew thorns, and we transitioned from keepers of a lush garden to laboring farmers. The earth and universe began to decay and groan under the weight of sin's curse. Not even 2,000 years later, humanity had turned so corrupt that God sent the flood as a judgment against us. For God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth."
What do you guys see marks this particular world that he says, that's it, I got to take it out? What's an attribute of this world that you see on the screen in that verse? Violence. What do you see in this world today? What did Jesus say will tell you when it's the time's coming near? It'll be as in the days of Noah. Let's just give that to a clue to you, right? Okay. So he says this literally, now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. Senseless killing. God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. All flesh had been corrupted in its way on the earth, and God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with this. What, again? You know, when he says something once, you kind of pay attention, right? When he says it twice, write it down. Because of them, and because of them, who is them? What's the previous chapter? We have all these fallen peoples and meandering around with evil spirit and the Nephilim and all of that. That's the kind of stuff that's going on in this time frame. And all of that seems to have had some kind of demonic focus, which was to destroy the integrity of the genetics of even the animals, not including the people, so that we could not get to a prophesied Messiah. And he says, no, not going to happen. Going to pick out some chosen people and animals with pure genetics, and I'm going to preserve them, and I'm going to take this thing back to Genesis 1 when the world was water. And he's going to take it all the way back to the studs here and do this. So check it out. He's going to destroy them all with the earth as it is. Now, Noah is told, this is how you're going to make this boat that's going to save, that's going to be the salvation vessel, right? And we all know that gopher wood, we're not sure what that is, but many of us just interpreted this as Noah telling his sons, gopher wood. You shall make the ark with its rooms and shall cover it inside and out with pitch. It's probably a cedar or a pine type, you know. this type of vessel. Why? Because there was an abundance of it we find in the fossil record, in our coal seams and all that, for one thing. Lycopods surely wouldn't have made a nice vessel, but cedar and stuff like that certainly would. And, bugs hate cedar. That's why we make our fences out of it and stuff. Okay, they don't like eating it. So this is how you shall make it. 300 cubits, the argument of what this cubit is, the Ark Encounter. Has anybody been to the Ark Encounter? Raise your hand if you have. That's pretty awesome. So an ancient cubit is north of 20 inches, depending on your interpretation of that, but it's at least 20 to 20 and a half inches, somewhere in that range. It's not 18 inches like more the modern Hebrew cubit. It's probably the ancient cubit, because this is ancient times, in Moses' day, when Moses records this. So it's longer than from here to here, probably by a few inches, maybe this in the width of a hand, something like that. Its breadth is 50, so if you're an engineering person, 300 by 50 by 30 are its dimensions. Breadth, cubits, height, 30. This is the dimensions. What's fascinating about that, if you're an engineer type, all right, and I'm this guy, is that this is exactly what we need for maximum stability, maximum capacity, right, and maximum strength. In fact, a South Korean marine engineer, PhD from Michigan, who's not a believer, studied this and said, you know what? That can't be by chance, because this is exactly how we design our transoceanic barges today. In fact, if you're familiar with the HMS Dreadnought in and around World War II and the British, the first and most stable battleship that they designed that could lob rounds inland was the Dreadnought class, which is 527 by 82 by 53, almost exactly the same dimensions. The only difference between a barge and these battleships that use these same dimensions from thousands of years ago is they're built to go forward, right? They're built to carry something and move forward in the water. Did Noah's boat have to go anywhere? No, it's just a box, It doesn't have to go anywhere, literally. So fascinating that this, and this is the ratio if you take away the zeros and just think about it, it's 30 by 5 by 3. So let's see, I'm probably 30 feet from maybe that wall. I'm going to give you the ratio, and it's only 5 foot by 3 foot. I mean, it's long and narrow, isn't it? Think of a shoebox stretched out. That's basically what this ratio looks like. And if you've been to the Ark Encounter and you see how big this is, it's shocking when you see it on this scale. It would not fit on the turf in Arrowhead. It's that big. Okay. Now, here, one of the arguments often early on in the 70s, and I know when I was not a believer, that I thought, well, the Ark can't be true because it would have capsized during tsunamis if there really was these oceanic rifting and crusts and springs coming up and all the oceans in turmoil. This thing would have capsized. But guess what we've learned? In tsunamis at deep sea, you get a surface rise, even in a major tsunami like the one that happened in Japan we're going to look at. If you're at deep sea, you really don't have that much of an impact. It's when you're in shallow water that you get thrown around, right? So these tsunamis that are going across the globe are more like this. So the Japanese Coast Guard, during the tsunami they had, were out at deep sea when it happened. And they're anticipating out there in the ocean when this happens, near the point where the quake was, where the epicenter was, they're thinking, we're going to get capsized here. We're going to get trashed by this wave. But they didn't realize that nobody had kind of thought about this to the point where if you're at deep sea, that wave just is not that high. So watch the reaction of these guys and listen to the reaction of them when they realize, wait, it's not that big a deal. They're shocked. But here is an actual video of a tsunami, one of the biggest in history in our lifetimes. And they're out, you can see the crest of the wave coming toward them, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to get capsized.
10メーターだね。す これ第2弾来るからな。
4円前進12度。
停電が確認されています。確認されているだけでも
ここちょっとスピードアップして。
4円前進20度。
It's no big deal. Okay, okay. So they're thinking we're toast. But the reality is at deep sea with tsunamis, does it match the biblical record of the oceans of the deep, the springs of the deep opening up and the rifting and the tsunamis? Totally easily survivable in a boat that was built for maximum strength and stability and capacity, actually, like the Ark is. Plus, it's not moving forward into the wave, it's sitting there. So it doesn't even have to deal with that kind of component. So let's look at the Chuck Missler and this understanding of Noah's Ark and its design, which kind of struck him from his background at the Naval Academy and whatnot, that this is an actual vessel.
Dimensions, whether cubits or feet, doesn't matter. We know that it's 50 cubits wide and 30 cubits deep, and let's assume it's carrying weight that lets it have about let's say a 15 cubit draft, okay? Now, of course, its weight is concentrated in its center of gravity, which would be in the middle. It has a weight coming down, and it's got a buoyancy that's going up that's equal. Follow me? That's why it sits in the water. It's balanced and it's equilibrium. Let's assume it tips over from wind or waves and so forth. Gravity is pulling down through its center of gravity, but the water that is displaced is pushing up at it in its buoyancy. But you'll notice that it's going to have the center of buoyancy will be at the centroid of a triangle. If I knock it over about 30 degrees, center of a triangle, at the centroid of the triangle is offset from the gravity. So this forms a couple tending to straighten it out. You follow me? Because the upward pressure is attempting to move it counterclockwise in the diagram. Follow me? So, and they're equal, of course, but it's what's called a couple. It's a moment. And it turns out this particular design, as long as the center of the vector of buoyancy is above the center of gravity, it's stable. It'll right itself. In this particular design, it can virtually go almost to 90 degrees without tipping over. It's incredibly stable proportions. And so either, anyway, it's interesting that it's no surprise, of course, that God knew what he was doing. And so, but I mention that because these things, what I'm sparing you, by the way, is the narratives of the flood accounts in virtually every ancient culture. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, you name it, they all have their myths. And they're all alike, how the earth was flooded and God appointed this one guy to build a boat and save his family and the animals. That story, in its essence, is embodied in the legends of every ancient culture. But on the one hand, there are points of similarity that are fascinating. The doves and the raven are being examples. There's some elements of the stories that they're very similar. On the other hand, they're so fanciful, they're absurd. What's interesting about the biblical account, obviously it's the true one, but it is that the proportions are rational and have stood up to scientific scrutiny.
So has anybody heard of the flood of Gilgamesh? Right? What was the dimensions of his ark? Does anybody know? It was a cube. Good luck floating around in a bobber out there with all your animals. Not a good idea. Now we're up to how do we get all these animals on the ark? I'm going to call in. I'm phoning a friend. Here comes Dr. Ward Brown, the veterinarian, and he's going to talk to us about animals and how we get this capacity and the kinds and whatnot. And I'm going to hand this over to him for a few minutes. He's got one. Yeah, he's ready to roll.
I think I'm mic'd up and ready to go. All right. So, Dan, thank you very much for describing to us the ark, how it was built, and describing to us some of the features at the time before the the flood of Noah, the features of the earth geologically and things to that effect. So one of those features is a single landmass, and that that we'll see. Dan will have great graphics on that to show you what happens to that later on. The other feature is that there is, not mentioned very often, but I think it's important, the amount of land versus water on the Earth at that point in time. The estimation is that the land mass was 50% of the surface of the Earth, and the water was 50% of the surface of the Earth as well. And it's estimated that perhaps before the flood that the oceans were not as deep either, and maybe there was floating forests that were growing on that water, maybe covering 25%. Some researchers have provided those as guesstimates and things to consider as what's going on with the with the surface of the Earth at that point in time. So today we have about 30% of the Earth is covered by land, and 70% rest of it is covered by water. So there's a big difference in those terms. So that is the geological aspect. At that time, with probably an environment in which we are going to accept that there probably was not much weather going on. Noah may have never seen any rain, so he's asked to build this ark, in which he does, he and his boys, and probably some other help. But they build this huge boat, and it probably hasn't rained it before then as well. And the very stable, mild climate over the entire Earth at that time probably has taken place, which then would allow for not only that tremendous amount of vegetation, which that vegetation would have the opportunity to grow to be huge in size because of the assumed abundance of water, humidity, things to that effect, and also the animals, demonstrated by the fossil findings of dinosaurs that are up to 100,000 pounds, maybe 200,000 pounds, estimated that they might have weighed, some of the huge brontosaurus that have been found. So abundance of vegetation, huge animals at the time, and people were living up to 900 years of age. Population, it's not really known what the population was, but estimates is that the population could have been 200 million to 1 billion or more people living on the Earth at that point in time as well. So just to give you kind of more background on what was taking place and what it was like at that point. As I'm talking here, I want to let you be aware is that I have an outline here for those of us which like this stuff called paper with words written on it. If you like that, they're up here in a box, and it's an outline in which I prepared, mostly talking about the life aspects associated with the flood, the pre-flood, the flood activity, and the post-flood. So I'd like to let you have that as an opportunity as well if you're interested. So now we have this ark. Now we need to also try to make it sound feasible to be able to put all the animals on there. If you ever heard a skeptic about Noah's Ark, probably is that there's no way that you could be able to put all of the animals that we see nowadays and their ancestors. There's no way that could have taken place. It's feasibly impossible to do that, and you got to be a little bit unwise, I would say, to us, unwise to even believe that you could be able to fit all the animals on there. How could that possibly be? One huge dinosaur would take up one level of it, they would say. So anyway, we're going to try to talk through this. And so, listen to a guy who grew up on a farm, farm with a lot of cattle and also, studied veterinary medicine and practiced for several years as well. And I think it's quite likely, quite feasible that it can be done. So those of you that have gone to the Ark Encounter are already ahead on this, because you probably maybe have seen this particular diagram there. And this diagram is one which has it's been one which is the researchers, the people at the Ark Encounter, at the Answers in Genesis, they put a lot of thought into this and a lot of study. And what we come up with is that this idea of kinds. There's about 1,400 total number of different kinds it's estimated that went onto the ark. And these are land animals. So these are the, not the creatures in the sea, not the sea creatures, and it's probably not going to include the insects as well, but it's going to include those with the breath of life through their nostrils, and so it's going to be land animals. And the different kinds, I touched upon kinds last night and gave you a basic definition, is that a kind can be described as, or defined as, when the two, a male and a female, they can be able to reproduce and be able to have young. So the definition, some people say those young have to be fertile and be able to continue to reproduce. We've also seen some of the hybridization that's occurred, that not always does the two of a kind coming together, not always does that individual that they produce be fertile. So, and that's like mules, for example. They are very, very rarely are mules able to reproduce, but that's where a donkey and a horse comes together, and that means that they are of the same kind. So we don't have to have a representative of every single type of dog kind out there. We need to have two of the dog kind, and that would be two that go into the ark are going to have all the genetic information and the genetic variability to be able to produce all of our dog breeds we see, the wolves, coyotes, fox, dingo, and I could go on with more of the genuses that occur under the canid kind. So the kind is going to be related more to the family or order level of the modern form of classification, of the biological classification. And that biological classification, if you're familiar with it, is going to be the kingdom, phylum, order, class, order, family, genus, species. If you've heard that. So the kinds are going to be more in the line of where family and order come in on that classification. So that concept of kind applies to cats, dogs, equine, horses, and the porcine, pigs, all of the different kinds. So essentially coming up, remember, about 1,400 different kinds can be able to go on the ark, and then we can be able to have provided the genetic variability to provide all the different kinds of land animals that we see now on the land. And when they apply that, when God was going to send two of each kind at least, a male and female, and then there's going to be 14, and we're going to say 7 pair, 14 of the clean animals, and 14 of most of the flighted animals. They come up with a total of about 7,000 total animals on the ark. And I think that's feasible. So 7,000 total animals on this huge boat is feasible. God divinely selected the animals, divinely selected their genetics, their behavior, and divinely selected the ones their age that he would send to the ark. So those are divinely selected, and Noah did not have to go out and do any rodeo or anything to that effect to get the animals. Those animals did not have the fear of man instilled in them at that time, and those animals, God had not ordained or allowed the eating of meat at that time. Now, that could be part of the violence aspect that Dan was talking about that was taking place in the world. Could have been some of those animals did become carnivores. We don't know. That's speculation. But if they weren't eating meat, when Noah, the ultimate prepper, was told to take along food for yourself and the animals, some interpret that as saying, hey, that's going to be, essentially, you're going to be eating oatmeal. Noah, family, and all the animals are going to be eating grains as well, grasses, herbs, and things along those lines. There's probably a variety of things in which Noah took along, but there was not the carnivores on the ark at that time to have to deal with, have to work with. So does that make sense to you that there could be 7,000 animals on the ark, and now we could have all of the provided from those, all the genetic material and variability to provide us all of the land animals that we see nowadays? Does that make sense? That makes sense to me as a veterinarian. So the other thing is to look at it from a standpoint of, well, we have our animals, we want to go on a trip, and we want to take them along. So a lot of things go into that. I know some of you, probably have horses. It's a little bit different than taking your dog with you on a trip, but this is going to be more like taking your horses, somewhere, and you have to plan ahead. You have to, make sure you have the transportation. You have the, make sure there's going to be the proper amount of housing, proper food, and water source, waste management, and also does that animal have the disposition to travel as well? So all those things come into mind, and this is something which God, helped Noah with, to be able to take them and to have the proper animals go. So the size of the average size of the critter on the ark, these researchers at Answers in Genesis estimated it'd probably be about the average size of a full-grown sheep, which might be 125 pounds. So that means that the young ones are the choice animals to be able to take along. The juveniles, they're smaller, and they might be more docile. They might eat less. They might produce less waste then. And that would be all the proper considerations there of taking juveniles. So if they're a juvenile brontosaurus, for example, that's a lot different than an adult brontosaurus taken on the ark. So, so the average size from the little pocket pets, the hamsters, gerbils, things to that effect, of which in practice we call them pocket pets, that's to those, to the dinosaurs that could get bigger, the juvenile ones, 125-pound average size on that particular animal. And then to give an idea here of maybe a comparison, on a semi-truck trailer, the amount of sheep this size, that could be hauled in a trailer, and then how much cubic feet there are. So the cubic feet capacity within the ark is equal to 450 semi-trailers, and so that gives you an idea of it's a huge, huge boat. And if you've been there, you know, it's a huge boat, huge experience in that respect. So the thing that Scripture doesn't tell us, but Noah's informed some way or another, how much food to take along for he and his animals and his family. And we don't know. God probably told him, but they're on the boat for over a year. And so that would come into play there. The animals, when they are, those of you who have animals, know that they will respond differently sometimes in a situation where it's maybe closed in, maybe it's the lights are down a little bit. They'll be calmer. Maybe they'll go into a bit of a quiet, sleeping, hibernation state, which that makes them easier to easier to handle, and also easier for them to withstand the any stress of the travel or anything to that effect that might be occurring. So you excuse me. So the animals. I used to, in practice, I had a couple exam rooms in which, particularly for birds or for fractious cats, and that's, or spirited cats. We wouldn't call them. We would, to the owner, wouldn't say, "Oh, your cat is a mean, fractious cat." No, they're spirited. So for the spirited cats, that would go into an exam room and didn't have any windows. And so it's something in which the exam room light had a dimmer, and so we would, it was, if we knew the personality of the kitty cat or the bird, we would have the owner go in and say, okay, we're just, kind of turn this down for a little bit, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes. That dimming of the lights allows them to calm down, and that's going to be probably the environment that's taking place inside the ark as well. So, feasibility-wise, I'm sold. I think it can happen. Are you with me? Yeah, okay. So on 450 semi-trailer loads, there could be 112,500 sheep if being handled to be as in a semi-trailer. Of course, there's enough room in there otherwise in which they don't have to be packed in like in a semi. So, and then Noah, with having 100 years to ahead of time for sure, 100 years, 120 years to build the ark, be thinking about it, preparation, God directing. He's going to have to then also determine the best form of housing and things like that inside the ark as well. So it probably wasn't going to be as bad as sometimes as we had to deal with housing in veterinary practice, particularly if we had a multi-faceted practice, which we would see, the reptiles, birds, pocket pets, and other animals in that respect. But when I first got out of practice, or got out of school into the practice, that practice did see, there was, doctors which saw birds, doctors which saw the reptiles, snakes, lizards, doctors which, dogs, cats, then the pocket pets. So saw them all. And just one little story is one day came in, and it wasn't either of my cases, but the lead technician said something like this in the morning, was that Dr. Smith, good news, your patient ate. Dr. Jones, bad news, your patient was a meal. So that was a time when a snake was, and we had the exotics room, which was, a closed-in, quiet room. It was warmer in there, so it's a great place for the snakes, the lizards, the birds to be in together. And then, so when the snake started feeling better, it was a boa constrictor. It pushed up out of its cage and then pushed up out and then got into one of the bird cages and had its meal. But Noah probably did not have to worry about that, but that's kind of an extreme example of how that of the housing and that could take place. So so enormous capacity on that. Those 450 semi-trailers, if they were driving past, if you're sitting down on the highway and you're seeing them driving past and you took your chair out there and they driving by, probably highway speed and regular distance apart, it would take at least 45 minutes for that whole row of semis to pass. Or if they were parked fender to fender, then it would take probably about 6 miles of highway for them to be able to be parked fender to fender. So a tremendous size of a boat here. So we touched upon this question kind of yesterday, if there were dinosaurs and people together. But this one, were dinosaurs on the ark? Of course they were. If they were with the people, at the same time, they took smaller dinosaurs and they were on the ark. And for any of the kids which might have heard Kevin Meyer, I don't know if any of the kids in here heard Kevin Meyer the other day. He gave a great presentation on that, the dinosaur guy. So, and here is a sign, this is a fossil. There's 2 fossils here, 2 creatures represented. Here is a mammal here that inside they have identified and pointing to is that's the meal was a dinosaur, so a small dinosaur. That's evidence to show that dinosaurs and mammals lived at the same time. The secular evolutionists would have us to believe that they were not here at the same time. They'd have us also believe is that the humans and dinosaurs did not occupy this earth together at the same time. So this gives here's a picture of some housing that they proposed at the Ark Encounter, and all of the ideas of waste management and feeding and things to that effect, in which if you have 7,000 animals, and then if you have 8 people, so that's going to be about, not quite 1,000 per person that they need to be taken care of. But they wouldn't have to be fed every single day, and then they could have their waste systems in which you wouldn't have to be in there with a pitchfork and moving hay or straw every day or anything to that effect. So there's been proposals along those lines. So we'll read this. And of every living thing, of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind, and we already talked about that kind, into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, and the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. As for you, take for yourself some of all food which is edible, and gather it to yourself. And it shall be for food for you and for them. Thus Noah did according to all that God had commanded him. So it's going to be food for you and also for them. So it's kind of indicating that they all ate the same thing. Okay, we're going to go back. So feasibility that 7,000 animals, 1,400 different kinds could go onto the ark and survive a 3-day tour, turn it into a 378-day tour, is feasible. And that's something in which the skeptics, now you will be able to talk to and help to educate the skeptics in which would not believe that at all. So, like I said, if anyone wants any of the outlines, then they're up here. And what else?
Are we ready for questions, or do you have more? You present one?
Okay. Yeah, so there's, no question. Okay, all right. All right, thank you. You're a great audience. Thank you very much.
So now we're prepared for something. What do you think's getting ready to happen? What was the world like? It was full of. We built this massive structure that is a feat of marine engineering designed to handle everything that could possibly happen. It's got enough room for basically 112,000 sheep, but we only need room for about 7,000 roughly animals. And if you've been to the Ark Encounter, you realize how huge this thing is. They probably had a tennis court on one of the floors. I mean, it's huge. And plenty of room for food and everything else, especially for what God had designed. But let's now walk into the scripture of this flood coming now at this point in time. And so let's get our eyes and our minds around the event and what happened.
600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. These two events, the fountains of the great deep breaking up and the windows of heaven opening, began the first day of a 371-day-long calamity that resurfaced the earth and killed everything that moved on land. Hot magma mixed with steam pierced the earth's crust. Giant rifts or tears ran thousands of miles across the planet. Scalding hot magma vaporized massive amounts of water that jetted into the atmosphere. The water fell back to earth as intense global rain, along with torrential rain from heaven for 40 days. Worldwide catastrophic rifting caused massive mud-filled tsunamis to speed across deep ocean floors, then onto shallow ocean floors, killing everything in their path. The first mega sequence wipes out mostly shallow marine habitats. The bursting fountains of the great deep spew out megatons of magma and carbon dioxide. Sure enough, the first mega sequence rocks show a spike in volcanic activity and massive amounts of carbon dioxide. During these first 40 days, intense water currents overtopped most of the flooded continents. Water-laden sediment travels at highway speeds. Thick sediment blankets start covering low regions of the continent. Fossils show that the first 3 megasequences buried the shallow seas that were filled with marine life, as these deposits have almost no trees or land animals. All 3 megasequences covered similar environments across North and South America and Africa, the 3 continents mapped so far. One global cause, Noah's flood, best explains this one worldwide effect.
All right. What do we see across all these continents? We see the same layers, rock layers, sedimentary layers on all these different continents. Not only do we think they were all together, but we see that this impacted this catastrophe through all these drilling exercises we've done on all the continents, shows us that these layers are the same on all these continents. So they all experience the same thing at the same time. And they called these surges of water and tsunamis and mud slurries that bury things and retreat and advance and retreat. They call them mega sequences because they are massive things that on a global scale. And they have these names for these that they named them across all these continents. I'm not going to go into that, but basically what we see is they align perfectly with the biblical record that it was a quick, catastrophic event from this fountains of the deep, right? The windows of heaven, downward fall, the tsunami sequences, and then the huge volcanic activity, which explains so much scientifically, explains our ice age as well, which we'll talk about next after the flood. All of this makes perfect sense. Let's look at this sequence so you get a good understanding now of how these different sequences we see in the Bible documented, how they become what we see in geology.
Join us now as we reveal how Noah's flood lines up with brand new scientific research. Over 1,800 oil well boreholes from 4 continents have all been compiled and mapped. The newly emerging map tracks the thickness and extent of each rock type as they were laid down by the flood. This research reveals the same 6 megasequences of sedimentary rock deposits across multiple continents. Each megasequence contains a huge stack of rock, often with coarse-grained sandstone on the bottom, then finer-grained deposits like shale, then topped by limestones. Each megasequence is bounded above and below by flat, eroded surfaces called unconformities. A few places on Earth have layers that represent all 6 megasequences. How did they get there? What do they say about Noah's flood? Catastrophically water-deposited sedimentary layers top most of the world's continents. Would Noah's flood bring lots of water and lots of mud? Geologists agree on the 6 megasequences, but they differ on the timescale in which they happened. If they took millions of years, then they have little to do with the flood. But if they were all deposited rapidly and recently, then the flood should come to mind. Many also question when a larger landmass, such as a Pangaea-like supercontinent, broke into continents that moved to their current configuration. For the first time ever, new megasequence maps allow us to see how the flood shaped our entire planet.
Do you see how these plates during the flood sequences moved from other places and slammed into one another? What do you think happens when a bunch of mud layers are on land and these continents, these plates, slam into each other? That's right. And so we would expect, if that is true, we would expect to see sedimentary layers like pancakes turning almost vertical. Do we see that? Check it out. We're expected to believe from our public education, at least I was, that this happened over, literally billions of years here on Earth, from the Cambrian, which are the very basic creatures supposedly, all the way to the more advanced creatures because of evolution. But is that what we find? No. Actually, what we learn is they're buried in order that they died. So if these things started at the oceans, the shoaling animals like the trilobites and the horseshoe crabs and some of these basic creatures like that live in the shallow oceans, they got buried, they got waxed first, so they're buried first. And how do we know that that's true? Well, I've got a trilobite up here. You guys can't see him, but he's from this Cambrian area. But his tracks are now being found all the way up into the Mississippian. We're talking about not tens of millions, but hundreds of millions of years later, supposedly from an evolutionary standpoint, we're finding this little guy's tracks 200-300 million years later in a completely different layer of the geologic column. What's the problem with this guy dying right here, but his tracks are being found up here? We got an issue. If you're an evolutionist like I was, you've got an issue. You cannot explain that away. What explains it away is some of them survived these initial sequences and mud flows and burying and left some tracks behind before they got it. That's more like what happened. And so the order in which animals died gives us our sequence of the fossil record. So we're to a point now where we wanted to hand out fossils to the youngsters. If you're a kid here, I'd say, let's just say you're 20 or under. You're a kid to us. And did you receive a fossil? If you did not get a fossil, raise your hand and you're one of those people that's 20 or under that you would like one. Okay? Where's my friend Steve? There he is. Steve, get those guys some awesome fossils off my table in the baggie back there. And if you're older than that and you really are into this and you want to carry around a fossil in your hand as an apologetics asset to have, I'm totally fine with you having them too. So raise your hand if you want a fossil. I'm totally cool. There's plenty of them. And Steve is going to hand those out. So there's probably a half dozen people. But while he's doing that, we're going to talk about those fossils you get next, and we're going to play a little game. And you're going to be shocked at what those fossils teach us, I think. and how confirming the Bible is about a global flood in which everything was buried in order that it was killed more so than how it evolved into something else. There's too many problems with that from a geological and a paleontology and archaeological perspective, that these animals evolved from something to another. Just while he's handing those out, this little trilobite that I'm holding up here, and I'll put him back on the table so you can look, I want you to get a look at his eyes. He has a compound eye which has 10 functional perspective, 10 functions that most modern eyes in most animals today don't even have. It's so advanced. But yet he's at the bottom of the geologic column with no transitional species before him. No transitional species before him, but he has an eye that can see in low light, bright light, forward, backward, up, down. 10 components to this compound eye he has. It's the same eye we find in the horseshoe crab today. Exactly the same. Hasn't changed. Went through all that billions of years of evolution, and he never changed. That eyeball never changed. And somehow he shows up in the record with this ridiculously complex eye. It's phenomenal. And to actually, you very rarely will find a fossil where you can actually see the eyes on the animal like you can this one. And so I'm going to put him back there. He's very small, but he's very special because you can actually look and see this compound eye. But remember, if you were an evolutionist, you've got to explain how he shows up here in this explosion of life. Punctuated equilibrium does not work to explain a 10-part compound eye, most complex eye in nature, that exists without any previous ancestors. Just shows up there. You know why? Because God made him this way, and he got buried real quick because he's a shoaling animal. The springs of the deep put him under mud real fast. That's why we find him at the bottom. Okay, so once everybody's got fossils, you want to take a few questions? Because you've got time now to do it. Question?
Like these guys handing out the fossils, kind of looks like communion.
It is. Don't break them, though. Don't break them or don't chew them or no.
Those were live.
They're gonna hurt
those
your
were
teeth.
live things at one point, right?
That's right.
For us non-science people, you talk about
That's
fossils.
right.
Those are no, and now they're rocks.
But
We had a question back here.
There's plant and there's animal in that bag, and they're mostly marine. By the way, 99%, 98.89% of all fossils found are marine fossils or plants. Why? Because they died first, that's why. Okay? And the inland animals and the ones that had some intelligence to run away, they died very late in this situation.
They went to high ground.
They went to higher ground, and however many people there were, we do not know. They would have certainly been way inland and away from all of this and smart enough to do that, and probably died and floated, and bad things happened to those people and their fossils. Probably broke up into a million pieces by the various sequences. But question.
Yeah. Somebody had a question back here. I saw somebody had. No? Okay. Oh, okay. Back here on the back.
Yes. Question.
Oh, she wants
Oh,
fossils.
she just wants fossils.
Oh, okay.
Okay. He wants a fossil. Yes. No. Okay. We probably do.
It
Though.
was as Pangea at the start of the flood,
Yeah, we believe it was a single landmass.
and that was 2,000 years in the New Earth time frame.
How long was it till the flood?
Yeah.
There's varying opinions on that as far as what the actual year of the flood was. Dave, what would you say is your best guess at the year of the flood? Since he's got the degree in Hebrew and whatnot, let's go to him.
Yeah, from the our text, the Masoretic text, it would be about
Yes.
2700 BC. If
There
you
you go.
go to the older one, it would be about 3500. If you use Septuagint, it'd be about 3500 BC.
So
Yeah.
3,000 years, give or take.
So about 4,500 years ago to
Ooh, Alex has a question. We'll get to the adults. Right, Alex. Is it Alex, right? Okay, what's your question, Alex?
Well, it has to do with its design. So the water, you know, when you, if you took your hand and held it out flat in a tub full of water and you push down on the water, you have pressure pushing back against your hand, don't you? If you turned your hand this way and went, what happens? You can cut right through it, right? But that tension and that pressure that pushes up, the forces of the water pressure pushing up against it with its flat bottom or its bottom of the boat is actually part of what kind of helps it right itself because the water's pushing on it. That was the video that showed him turning it, and he's got this pressure from below that's always going to be trying to push the boat back right, just like if you put your hand flat and push down on water. Okay, does that kind of make sense? It's a deep thing to think about for somebody your age, but that's a great question.
Here in the back.
Yes, brother.
Question, fossils found in the Cambrian, are there the same fossils found in Mississippi?
There are some. Yeah. There's some great examples of that. In fact, if you've got a fossil in your hand, I'm going to teach you that fossil looks exactly like it did the first time it showed up, only they're still alive. And they look the same. And there's more to it, to the story after we talk.
Got another student here. Got a student. We got to take the young people here first, the students. Go ahead.
I heard that there were some live trilobites found in like some of the, in more, like not around America.
You're like in the Arctic, you mean?
Live
Actually,
trilobites.
I actually have some pictures of these animals that look very much like a trilobite that they actually found in super deep waters off of the Arctic, Antarctica, and other places. But they might be the same family or same kind of animal, but these animals that we see in the record that died first, basically they all lived in the same area, and that area all over the world just got smoked by mud flow. So very few of them would have survived. But it's possible, and I'll show you a fossil that we thought was completely gone extinct and whatnot, a nautilus or an ammonite, that amazingly we found these things still alive, like coelacanth and others. There's a question in the back.
Student right back there. Go.
That's a really good question.
Are there still some dinosaurs?
Are there still ancient creatures like that we would see in the fossil record in the seas that we may have not discovered? We had this question from high schoolers yesterday. What percentage of the seas have been explored? Ariana knows. Roughly 3 to 4%. So do you think that there could be some creatures that are deep water dwelling creatures? Every time that there's some kind of volcanic vent found and we send a bathoscope down there to the bottom and they kind of check it out and they what do they say? Oh my gosh, look, there's a new form of animal we've never seen before, you know, and they use the heat from these vents to stay alive, these giant worms and things. Well, of course there's going to be creatures that survived in the water because 97% of the waters nobody's ever even explored it to know.
Yes.
If you're young and you are into oceanography, that would be a cool thing to study.
Several years ago, I forget, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, the Japanese fishing vessel brought up an animal that weighed about 2 tons. It looked like a plesiosaurus, you know. In there. It was a big animal that looks like these marine reptiles, big one, and head was hanging down. It was rotting. It had been dead for some time, so they threw it back in. But they did take a picture of it before they threw it in, and you'd say, "Well, there's one of those. There's more of those down there someplace," and it was obviously one of these marine reptiles. We'd call them dinosaurs, but it's in the water, and it was a big one. You know, when you're talking about 2 tons, but it smelled so bad they just got rid of it.
Not very smart. We had a question back there. He's back there. You want to respond to that?
Sorry, I was handing out a
Well,
fossil to
the-
somebody back
The
here.
flood actually describes and gives us a reason to believe that this fossilization could occur. Is that kind of the gist of the question? Okay.
So the fossilization, one of the things that we're going to talk about after the break here is that process and how that happened, how we know it happened rapidly. We're going to talk about how the, by the way, here's just a real simple thing to think about. Who has ever been to the shore of a river or a lake or an ocean? What do you see laying on the ground? Shells. Are they, for the most part, 99% of the time, do you find one shell or two still together? That's because clams, when they die, they open up and you find the two parts of the shell. But if they're alive, they stay closed. And so your fossils in your hands, a lot of you guys, what we're talking about next is these clams died alive. Not only that, you're gonna learn real quick they got buried real fast and still alive. We had a couple of, and I have to find those again. Dave, you remember the two that I had where these two were like hanging on together? You know, that's really kind of sad. It was kind of be a romance story there between these two. But they were buried alive and they're closed. They didn't have a chance to open, just gone, done. And that's what you're holding in your hands. You're holding shells, living animals that were buried alive rapidly, so fast they couldn't die and pop open and wash to shore and find them along the shore. Okay, that's a really important thing to think about. But the more important thing is why are they on the top of the
And why don't you?
mountains?
Did you? Yeah. Why? You want to go ahead? Did you
All right.
talk about that yesterday?
No, I did.
I went with kids, but I mean.
Yeah, I
here-
did. I
here?
did a little bit. Yeah, but we'll just.
Let's do something about mountain climbers.
Yeah. That's how do those clams get to the top of the Himalayas? How do those? They're mountain climbers. That's how they got there. No, because they got buried because they were the first ones alive and got buried by millions of tons of sediments, right? And then they're buried in layers like pancakes underneath stuff, and then continents, plates slam into each other. Boom, they get pushed up 5 miles into the air in the Himalayas. I've got some Himalayan ammonites here with me.
We had another question right there.
Haven't read any records of finding human.
Oh, yeah. That's a really good question.
The
So
human
we're
issue.
Human, so we're late in the game, and we're probably getting destroyed by tsunami, whatever, all the way to the very end and the runoffs and everything. Most people hold that the humans and most mammals, because basically 99% of our fossils are marine, plant, or animal, are probably offshore and buried deep. But there's been, like in Alaska, there was a finger, portion that X-rayed, even appears to have bone and whatnot. There's a few fragments like that. Probably better evidence is the stuff that have been found in coal seams. In coal seams, like in Oklahoma and in Virginia and places where they're finding artifacts in coal seams, like a brass bell, or there's lots of those, or the hammer, the famous hammer that people may have seen online. You can't explain these away buried in limestone unless there was a population of humans that got buried with it. There's definitely those kinds of things to look at.
But what I hear the dinosaur guy say
We got
is
ate
that
by sharks,
basically we drowned and we were floating around and we got
Yeah.
That we won't go into great detail, but
Yeah.
that's why we are not around as much as some of the others too.
The-
That's another aspect.
Yeah, the creation research guys that studied this estimate that even if we are very generous with populations, that it would be one person buried per 65 cubic square kilometers of Earth. So we're talking 40 miles. So what's 40 miles from here? Is El Dorado about 40 miles out? What is that? El Dorado, is that like 40? That's 20. Okay. So we're going to take some guy. We're going to chop him up into little parts because he got thrown around and crushed by waves and everything else. And we're going to spread his remains from here to twice as far away as El Dorado.
And then we're going to try to find it.
And then it's going to be that deep too. And you go find me a part. And even if there's one geologist that says that I'm sure we found human remains, but we're not even sure what we're looking at because they're just obliterated for the most part.
So we have one more question,
Yes.
and then we've got directions on lunch. Go. Student.
Oh, where did the name dragon come from? Because we didn't have the word dinosaur, terrible dragon or terrible lizard until the 1800s. So that was the term they used. Jonathan, in China, with the Jonathan's a pastor here in town for Chinese group people.
back there,
Let's all
Jonathan.
clap
Wave,
for
pastor.
Jonathan. There he is. Question. So we have the different, years of rat and monkey and all these things. What are those? There's the rat, there's monkey, there's what?
The year of.
Year of in the Chinese culture. What are there?
We have rabbit, we have ox, and dog, pig, chicken. Tiger. Yeah, tiger and
Can you just say them all again real quick now that you've got them going?
My English is not that good.
No, it's going to get real good today. Here we go.
Okay,
I'm going to make a point here, but go ahead.
Dragon, pig, dragon, snake, horse, pig, rooster, rabbit, and goat,
Monkey.
monkey.
We got the
Okay,
internet out here.
hold on. Are all those real animals?
Yes.
Well, what about
Well, I
dragon?
accept dragon.
Well, except a dragon? Do you think that they just had one made-up animal and the rest of them are all real? No, because dragons were real to these people that came up with this.
And the dragons were actually the dinosaurs.
Yeah, I mean that's what we call them today.
And
In
if-
Nebuchadnezzar's court, there's wonderful petroglyphs and things like that. It looks like Nebuchadnezzar had basically a dragon keeper. He has one. He had one on occasion. There was a guy assigned to taking care of this animal. So we think they survived the flood. They probably were a menace, so every culture saw them and killed them, and because they don't want them coming into town and eating their sheep and everything. And plus, it was a trophy animal, I'm sure. And then if you've got more like the herbivores that are big and slow and meaty, well, we kind of know what happened to those. Plus, the flood world is so different, they can't survive the air pressure and the air. And the vegetation lost. We only have 3% of the vegetation of what there was pre-flood. They didn't have things to eat. The air pressure, the air content, oxygen content, they went extinct, and they were probably easy prey. There's some great verses. I think Jeremiah, where we're talking about this place where the dragons dwelled. They're usually out in the middle of nowhere. It's like they were trying to hide and just survive attack or people and things like this. There's some wonderful verses in the Bible about
Yeah, the dinosaur guy yesterday showed the students, he had a whole list of where you can see the word dragon in the Bible, and there's about 20 verses that he lists. Okay, we're going to eat. We got Chick-fil-A. Thank Chick-fil-A. Let's thank Chick-fil-A. They've provided